What's up guys, Lifting here. Today I want to share with you a pretty awesome and powerful crit Dagger Reave, Vaal Reave ranger build that I've been enjoying and playing a lot myself lately. This build is endgame viable, it has great clear speed, and it is both softcore and hardcore viable as well. Let me give you a short breakdown of the build before I show you the different skill gem setups and the passive skill tree. Let's talk about the defensive powers first, guys. This build utilizes 4 types of different layers of defense to prevent us from dying. First of all, this build relies on lots of evasion, and it achieves that by using evasion gear obviously and the grace aura, but also by picking up both acrobatics, face acrobatics and under skyle. Acrobatics and face acrobatics provides a flat 30% chance to dodge attacks and spells, and under skyles doubles your chance to evade projectile attacks. Secondly, this build picks up a lot of the block skill nodes and notables throughout the skill tree, and when using these in conjunction with the Crest of Perandus shield, we end up with a solid 58% chance to block attacks. If both evasion, dodge and block fails and we take heavy damage, the cast when damage taking Immortal Call skill gem setup we incorporate for this build will proc and make us immune to physical damage for a short duration until we can get into a safer position. And lastly, by using the right items and selecting the right skill nodes, this build ends up having a 7% life leached from physical damage attacks. That, along with the already high physical damage on Reave, makes this build leech a ton of life back, thus making it a lot safer in those hectic situations. All in all, a very solid defense for our character here. For offensive stats, this build boasts a 20k DPS, 9.1 attacks per second, 69% chance to deal a critical strike and a 350 critical strike hit multiplier. Needless to say, we deal a lot of damage. Now, let me show you how Reave and Vaal Reave works. Basically, when you attack an enemy with Reave, you will gain a Reave stack. Each stack of these increases the AoE or range of your Reave attack. By default, your Reave can reach 8 stacks. Let me show you how this works. Let's find some monsters here. And as you can see, we have no stacks right now. We're gonna attack these guys. We now have 8 stacks, and as you can see, I now have a good amount of range on my Reave attack. The Reave stacks will disappear after a short while if you're not attacking anything. And the reason we're using Vaal Reave along with Reave is that instead of the 8 stacks that Reave can achieve, Vaal Reave is able to achieve 16 stacks, and if we achieve these 16 stacks and keep continuing to attack afterwards, we can actually keep up these 16 stacks for as long as there are monsters to attack, which leaves our character with a very good range on his Reave attack. So let's see if we can find some monsters so I can demonstrate this. Alright, I think there is enough monsters for me to be able to demonstrate it here. So I'm gonna click my Vaal Reave now, keep an eye on the stacks up here, and keep an eye on the range that I am able to get on my Reave afterwards. 16 stacks now, and take a look at the range. Pretty sick, pretty sick. And if there had been more monsters, we would be able to keep up these 16 Reave stacks. So it's pretty cool. And as you can see, Vaal Reave only requires 32 souls, so you can basically use this very often. Now let's talk about the skill gem setups we use for this build. And we are of course first going to talk about Reave, our main attack skill. And what we want to do with Reave is to, of course, increase the damage. We want it to build up those Reave stacks as fast as possible. And we achieve that by using Power Charge on critical to obviously increase the critical chance of our character. Melee physical damage to increase the damage. The same goes for Multi-Strike, and Multi-Strike is also very important for building up those stacks a lot faster. And faster attacks. And this setup allows us to get those 9.1 attacks per second. If I were to have a 6th link, I would probably use added fire damage. You can use concentrated effect if you want. It will increase your damage by a lot, but it will also greatly reduce the AoE of your Reave, and I don't like that too much, but some people prefer that. And now for our Vaal Reave skill gem, we are using Multi-Strike, and again, it is to generate those Reave stacks as efficient as possible, but also of course to increase the damage. I've linked it with faster attacks and increased area of effect. And if you want, you can use another gem instead of increased area of effect. The reason I'm using increased area of effect is because I want my Vaal Reave to hit as many targets as possible, so we get that maximum amount of Reave stacks as easily as possible. For mobility, we are using Whirling Blades, faster attacks, and blood magic. And Whirling Blades really doesn't need anything other than faster attacks to work as a great mobility skill. And since we don't have too much mana to run on, I have linked it with blood magic, so we don't have to worry about that. And our Whirling Blades is pretty fast at the moment, as you can see. And next we have our aura skill gem set up. First we have Grace. You can use another offensive aura if you want, or a Herald if you're playing in softcore, but if you're playing in hardcore, I would suggest you use Grace. Additionally, we're using Hatred to increase the damage of our character. We're using Herald of Ash, and all of these are linked with reduced mana, of course. At the moment, my reduced mana gem is not high enough level for me to be able to use my Herald of Ash. I can activate it and it will increase my damage, but as you can see I only have 4 mana left, so I cannot use any of my abilities that require mana at the moment. But as my reduced mana will level up, I will be able to use Herald of Ash along with Grace and Hatred. So to begin with, you will probably have to do the same and not use Herald of Ash. Also, we're not going to talk about gear right now, but keep in mind that I'm using this in an Alpha's Howl, which gives me the 8% reduced mana reservation. And that is the reason I'm able to run these 2 auras and the Herald. You will not be able to run the Herald if you don't have the Alpha's Howl, or if you don't pick up any of the mana reduced reservation notables and skill notes in the skill tree. Next we have our curse of choice, the Assassin's Mark, and the Assassin's Mark is of course great. It increases our critical chance and it increases the damage of our critical strikes. Also it grants us chance to generate a power charge, but that isn't too important since we're already using power charge on critical, so we have plenty of power charges. I have linked Assassin's Mark with blood magic and increased area of effect, so I don't have to worry about not having enough mana to cast my Assassin's Mark, and increased area of effect is of course always nice, as it increases the range or the area your curse will hit. Lastly, we have this cast when damage taken set up, and I have linked cast when damage taken with Enduring Cry level 11, and cast when damage taken is level 10. Enduring Cry level 11, Immortal Call level 10, and increased duration, and as you can see at the moment it is level 17, but you can level it all the way to 20. And the reason we're using this cast when damage taken setup is for those really dangerous situations where you take a shit ton of physical damage, then our Immortal Call will proc and make us immune to physical damage for a few seconds, so you can get into a safer distance of the monster or whatever hit you. And that's it for the skill gem, guys. Now let's take a look at the passive skill tree and what I recommend you should pick up there. So the first thing we're going to do is to pick up this 8% increased attack speed skill node. After that we're going to head into this area where we're picking up evasion and life. We're then going to head down into finesse for the 20% increased accuracy and the 8% increased attack speed. After that we're picking up Heart of the Oak for the 8% increased maximum life and the 1% of life regenerated per second. When we have picked up Heart of the Oak, we're going to pick up these one-handed skill nodes here, along with Weapon Artistry for the 4% additional chance to block and the 20% increased melee physical damage. After we have picked up Weapon Artistry, we are picking up Precise Interception along with these shield skill nodes here. All of these provides more block chance and more defenses or increased defenses from our equipped shield. We're then heading into this cross section where we have a few places where you can go, but we're going to head back and pick up these one-handed attack speed skill nodes along with Aspect of the Panther. That provides a 16% increased physical damage with one-handed melee weapons, some attack speed, a small amount of life, and some nice movement speed. When we have picked up Aspect of the Panther, we're going to pick up Herbalism and this remaining life skill node here. We're then going to go in this direction, and our goal is now to pick up Acrobatics. When we have picked up Acrobatics, we will get that 30% flat chance to dodge attacks, but keep in mind that you will also lose 50% of your armor or energy shield that you currently have. So make sure that when you pick up Acrobatics that you're mainly relying on evasion based gear, otherwise you might find yourself a little squishy afterwards. We will eventually pick up Face Acrobatics, but not for now, we're gonna save that for later. From acrobatics, we're going to head into the shadow area of the skill tree. Here we're going to pick up this life skill node, then blood drinker, and the remaining life skill node. Blood drinker is great for our build because we are doing a lot of physical damage, and a lot of physical damage means that we are also leeching lots of life back to our character. When we have picked up a blood drinker, we're going to pick up deflection down here for the additional chance to block with our shields and the 20% increased defenses from the equipped shield. After that, we're going to move in this direction where we're picking up these 2 intelligence skill nodes here, and then we're going to pick up this dagger damage skill node. From here, we're going to pick up the dagger damage and attack speed skill nodes, and finally picking up flaying. Flaying is really nice. It provides 24% increased physical damage with daggers and 10% increased attack speed with daggers. We will eventually pick up Adder's Touch, but we're going to save it for now and then instead pick up Infused and move into this area where we're going to pick up dagger damage, and then some dagger damage and critical strike chains, and finally Night Stalker. Night Stalker is one of the absolute best critical strike notables for any dagger build. It provides 20% increased physical damage with daggers, but also 60% increased critical strike chains with daggers. Really nice. After we have picked up Night Stalker, we're going to pick up some more life, and we're going to do that by picking up these nearby life skill nodes here and the notable Written in Blood. Written in Blood is good for 2 things, and first of all, it is of course because of the 8% increased maximum life, but also because of that 10+ to strength that it adds. And the reason for that is that this build will have to either get lots of strength and lots of intelligence on gear if it doesn't want to rely on notables such as Wisdom of the Glade and Beef. So if you can get that through the notables or the skill nodes, that is of course great. When you have picked up Written in Blood, we are going to head down and pick up Cold-Hearted Calculation. And we're mainly picking that up for the 12% increased melee damage, but also for the 10+ to intelligence. And we need it to pass through into this area. And the way we're going to do that is by picking up these critical strike skill nodes, Assassination for the 30% increased critical strike chains and 35% increased critical strike multiplier, which is really nice. And then these 2 remaining critical strike skill nodes. We're heading into Quickness for the 20% increased physical damage, but also the 5% increased movement speed. From Quickness, we're picking up Sleight of Hand for the 20% increased physical damage with one-handed melee weapons and the attack speed. And from Sleight of Hand, we're picking up the notable Coordination that provides us with 12% increased attack speed, some cast speed, and some dexterity. Cast speed is of course not too important for our build, but it will improve the cast speed of our curses. From Coordination, we're picking up this really nice notable Blood Siphon, which grants us 12% increase to maximum life, some life gained on kill, but also strength, which we just talked about that we need in our skill tree. From Blood Siphon, we're going to pick up Trickery, and the cool thing about Trickery is that it also provides the intelligence that we just talked about. Additionally, it also provides elemental damage and critical strike chains, and elemental damage is good because we're using Hatred and Herald of Ash. When you have picked up Trickery, I would suggest that you go down and pick up Underskyle for that additional defense. After you've picked up Underskyle, we're going to go back towards the shadow area where we are going to pick up these dagger damage and critical strike chain skill nodes, and then finally Adder's Touch. Adder's Touch will give you 66% increased critical strike multiplier with daggers, and the unique property that critical strikes will now poison enemies. And the way that this works is that the poison damage is based on the critical strike damage of your critical strike. So the more multiplier you have throughout the skill tree or on your gear, the more poison damage you're going to deal, as well as the multiplier will increase the damage of your critical strikes. After we have picked up Adder's Touch, it is now time to head down towards the Ranger starting area again. Here we're going to pick up this Dexterity node and then head into Quickstep for the increased attack speed and the increased movement speed. From Quickstep, we're picking up Thick Skin for the extra life. And from Quick Skin, we're going to move towards this area. If you're feeling squishy at the moment, you can pick up these life and flask nodes, and we are going to pick them up eventually anyway in the skill tree. So for now, I'm just going to pick them up, but it is of course up for you to decide if you're feeling squishy or if you want to spend your skill points later on these. Either way, we're going to pick up Reflexes for the improvement to evasion, and then head through this way and into barrier for the 10% increased attack speed and the 6% increased movement speed. When you have picked up Harrier, I would suggest picking up True Strike for the 50% increased critical strike chance and the 10% increased critical strike multiplier. When you have done that, I would now suggest that you pick up Phase Acrobatics. After you have picked up Phase Acrobatics, I would suggest that you either pick up some more life if you're feeling squishy, or some more critical strike chance by selecting these skill notes here along with Heartseeker that provides a 25% increased critical strike multiplier. If you haven't picked up the life now, I would suggest you do it, pick up Hired Killer, and now the last 4 skill points we're going to spend is on Deadly Dilettante. And we're going in this direction, so we pick up the critical strike chance for daggers, and we're of course getting the 12% increased physical damage with daggers as well. And that's pretty much it for the skill tree, guys. Now let's take a look at the gear and the stat priorities I would suggest you try to aim for this build. Now the last thing we're going to talk about is what kind of affixes and stats on your gear you should prioritize to make your character as powerful as possible. And you of course already know this, but I'm gonna say it anyway, you should always be resistance capped when playing on merciless difficulty. So now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the other defensive stats that you should focus on in this priority. First, you want life. Secondly, you want evasion. Third, you want chaos resistance. And fourth, you either want dexterity, strength, and intelligence. Strength and intelligence is only if you need it to level up your skill gems. Dexterity should be your priority if you already have enough intelligence or strength, and that is because dexterity will provide you with more evasion rating. Also, it should be said that chaos resistance isn't too important, so don't go out of your way to try to cap your chaos resistance or anything. It's just nice to have, you know. So for offensive stats, you want as high physical damage as possible. Secondly, you want a high critical strike chance or critical strike multiplier. Thirdly, you want increased attack speed. And lastly, you want either dexterity, strength, and intelligence. And once again, the strength and intelligence are only needed if you're having trouble leveling up your skill gems. If you already have enough, get dexterity, as it will also provide you with some accuracy rating. So for flasks, I'm running 2 Seething Hallowed Life flasks. One of them dispels Frozen and Chilled, the other one removes bleeding, and thirdly I'm running a Surgeon's Topaz or a Ruby flask to adapt myself to the environment. If there's a lot of fire damage, I'm of course using a Ruby flask. If there's a lot of lightning damage, a Topaz flask, and if there's a lot of cold damage, I'm of course using a Sapphire flask. I'm also using a Jade flask, a Surgeon's Jade Flask of Warding. When using this Jade flask, you will become immune to curses for 6 seconds. Additionally, because of the Surgeon's affix or property, we will recharge 1 charge every time we deal a critical strike. And because we're dealing so many critical strikes, we can have a really good uptime on the Jade Flask here, so we can basically use it almost every time we need to. And lastly, I'm running a Surgeon's Quicksilver Flask of Dousing, which will dispel burning, and it will recharge 1 charge when we deal a critical strike, which means that we can use it a lot since we're dealing so many critical strikes. Now for unique items, I would recommend that you at least get yourself a Crest of Perandus. The Crest of Perandus is cheap, but it is so good, so strong. It provides life, some lightning resistance, it provides some life leech, which is great for our build as I talked about earlier, but also the 10% additional block chains. Additionally, I will recommend that if you can afford it, to get yourself an Alpha Sow, because it will allow you to be able to run Hatred, Grace, and Herald of Ash when you get a high enough level reduced mana. As you can see, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't have a high enough level reduced mana yet to be able to do that because I have no mana left to cast my Reave abilities, but I will eventually be able to do that when my reduced mana levels up. Additionally, it increases the power of your auras, gives it 2+2 level of aura gems in this item, so it both makes us deal more damage with our auras and makes us more tanky if we're running Grace. For our chest piece, I'm using the Carcass Jack, and I'm using the Carcass Jack because not only does it provide a good amount of life, it also provides 12% to all elemental resistances, but most importantly, it provides the 20% increased radius of area skills and the 12% increased area damage. That means that the radius and the damage of our Reave will increase, so that synergizes really well with the Reave skill. And lastly, I've actually been using the Worm's Mold Leather Belt throughout my whole playthrough, and that is because it provides that strength, intelligence that we so sorely need for this build. It also provides us with some life, some resistance, obviously, and it gives us that physical attack damage, leech as life, along with some physical attack damage leeched as mana, and that is all you need. You can of course get a better belt if you craft it correctly, but for now a worm's mold is sufficient for me, and it is one of my favorite unique items, so I have a special love for this belt. But as I said, none of these uniques are required, they are just synergizing really well with the build. If you are interested, I will give you some more suggestions as to what kind of uniques you can use to make this build more powerful in my Path of Exile forum thread. But for now, let's stick with this.
It is woman's purpose to tempt and try the will of man.
Before we end the video, I want to mention that I highly recommend using Spectral Throw or Molten Strike with the two-handed physical damage-based weapon until you reach level 19. At that point in time, you can link Reave with Multi-Strike, and from there on, Reave will only get stronger and stronger as you progress through the game. Also, when you reach level 35, you can start to use the Might Play Dagger, which will carry your character for at least the next 15 levels. After that, try to get yourself a decent dagger with the stats in priority we talked about just before. And lastly, for the Bandit quest rewards, you should help Oak on both normal and cruel difficulty for the 40+ to HP and the 18% increased physical damage bonus. On Merciless, you should help Alira for the 1+ to maximum power charges. And that's it for now, guys. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?